This video is to introduce our virtual roundtable, which was focused on how to get your delivery teams to do 40% more in just 30 days. This event was expertly facilitated by our guest speaker, Becky Watson. She's an experienced enterprise transformation leader who excels assisting your teams to work smarter, not harder. Becky has a wealth of experience in agile and the transformation space, and I hope you enjoy the virtual roundtable. Thanks so much.
So this was our target, which you can see in just, it's really small font, but to increase our output, our daily throughput of things that were happening by 20%. And of course, the rules of the experiment were you can't add extra human headcount. This was not an exercise for them to determine how they could add staff on as fast as they possibly could in recruitment. That was out of scope. And they couldn't do extra hours per week. That was also out of the scope. This is an experiment with some fixed constraints, and you have to figure out how you can do more with less. That was what the constraints were of it. And of course, so it was a month later, and the Scrum Master and the product owner made time with me and came back. And of course, you know the output of this experiment because I was shocked, in the sense of I was shocked. And you know, because that was the title of today's seminar, is that when they came back, because this is the graph that they presented to me after that in the next 30 days. And I was looking at them going, are you for real? I said, did you guys actually do this? And they said to me, yeah. And I said, oh, I want to learn all about it. What happened? And I made the biggest song and dance you could ever have as a leader, telling them how awesome they were. So what's significant about this graph is if you look at all of these dots here in the bottom level, that tells me they were consistently delivering work at a constant pace of a cycle time less than 9 days. That's what it tells me. And when you see this average now rolling down, you see it peters out. We've got consistency with what they're doing in their behaviours. Yeah. And I said to them, I said, did you think you could do it? Because they said to me when I meet with the team and did an international Zoom, and they said, nah. So even though I'd given them all the training and all the knowledge and I knew they could do it, they said they could do it. Now, in all fairness, we know, so that was a downward trend. They'd had a great result. We now fill in this bottom corner of the canvas, and I've just blown it up for you here so you can have a look. But essentially what I asked for was 20% increase in the work they were doing. And what I got was actually 40%. And I guess like you, if I hadn't have seen it from my own eyes, I probably would have thought it was rigged. But except I controlled all the software and none of them had admin access. So there was no way they could fudge any of the numbers. They literally had to do this raw as it was. So that was double what I'd asked, and compared to the 2% that they'd originally asked me for, they'd more than quadrupled what they thought they could do. And I think that's it as a leader, isn't it? When you lead people to do awesome things, there's this challenge where if they don't believe in themselves, you've got to bring them on a journey of doing that, push them to get started and then encourage them like a massive cheer squad while they get through and doing it. And so that's how I got an IT DevOps team using 40% productivity in under 30 days, doing all of that. And I guess we're going to have lots of questions and I'm happy to answer any of those with you. But I just want to check. So Alan, if we could come off mute for a second, for everybody, I wanted to just check before I go any further, does everybody understand what a Kanban board is? Is there anyone, if you don't know what a Kanban board is, can you just pop it in chat for me so I know how many people don't know, because I'll explain then.
Also, Becky, I'd be interested at an appropriate moment in explaining the benefits of Kanban for business transformation as well. Some of our attendees are business transformation specialists and might well be working with developers. So I'd be interested if we could answer that question or give some insight onto that at an appropriate moment as well.
Yep, for sure. Yep. Okay, so I'm assuming that everyone knows what a Kanban board is, so we will skip through that of how we move through Kanban boards, except to say that one of the most significant differences between the Kanban that you may be using as a visualization tool for your team, say in Scrum, versus what we did was this having a limit to the work that was going on in process. So just quickly then addressing that question, the first question then, Alan, I've done this exact same way of working with procurement. I've done it with finance and accounting teams. I've done it with HR. I did it in Telstra at the same time with an HR recruitment and onboarding team that was multifaceted. You can do this in any area. It's just I'm using this example because of the numbers that I've got with that particular one. So happy to open to questions now. This is a round table. So what would you like to know about this case? Because this is not unusual for me to get this kind of results given the setup, but there were a couple of things that I did to get us to that point.
Becky, it's Sid. I'm happy to kick off. First of all, great story, great result as well. So well done. Congratulations. I just wanted to ask, in terms of the Kanban or visual management board, was that introduced into the process, or did they have one before and the backlog just simply wasn't being groomed and managed effectively? Would you have a view on that?
So they definitely had a Kanban board already, and they were doing Scrum. They were doing most of the artifacts and ceremonies of Scrum for that. So the answer was then shifting for them was about, there's some really key things that you shift when you move from one to the other. They're not that disruptive, but they're not that subtle either. The transition from Scrum, there's a couple of things. I'll explain it this way, Sid. You know the project management triangle that we all learnt in PM land?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, great. So do you remember how like we had these 3 constraints and you could only change one of them? When we're doing Scrum, we were essentially doing the constraint of a time box. You've heard people say, oh, we're going to time box this, yeah? That's essentially what a sprint is. But what we shift that is to that focus of focusing on the scope and containing that instead. So yes, they had a Kanban board, very simple one, but we changed also the columns of the Kanban board so that they knew where work was progressing much clearer through their columns, so massive customization for their team, and shifted that focus into scope because we set criteria on how they managed their scope, as in when they brought work ready to start and making really clear about what they were doing as far as scope and setting those constraints. So yeah, they did have a Kanban board, but they used it only as visualization.
Got it. So that would have effectively helped control the WIP as well. So keep the WIP to a manageable level and increase throughput as a result.
My experience is I think 60% of a team's throughput or productivity is based on what you put in. You know that old saying, garbage in, garbage out? Yeah. Having absolute clarity and focus on the what is critical so that people can be the best how people that they can be. In that what of what's in, what's out, what can be used, what can't. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
I'll go next. Nat here. Hi, Becky. It was a great presentation. Thank you. Just a question on the post your discussion with the team. Did they take up easier user stories? Because I saw a lot of spikes in the previous one. So probably they didn't size it properly when they did the sizing for those user stories. So is this the same baseline we're talking from the before and after?
Yeah, same content. As a matter of fact, I think for a start, we dealt with the issue of spikes because I think a lot of people just call that technical run forever time, like it just keeps on going forever. And I think the key was too, is even with those spikes, breaking them down into chunks, like what did you actually need to know? So we would come down and we would say, what can you spike in 1 or 2 days? What did you need to know? And even if your spike was then really 4 spikes instead of 1, because people would call spikes, oh, we just need to figure out how to do all of that. But they really didn't have clarity about when they knew enough to move on to the next thing. So the answer was even breaking down what they thought they originally called was spikes, whatever that meant to them.
That's good. Thank you.
Excellent. We've got a question in chat, Becky, from Megan Fisher. She said, aside from measuring and setting a target, what behavior did the DevOps team change to make such a huge difference?
Sure. Okay. Good question. All right. As I look back retrospectively as a leader, there was a couple of things I knew that were key components to the success to this. The first thing was that in my team, every team's programs, everyone learns, everyone applies what they've just learned every week. So we really bring the learning organisation process to you have to be doing that every week. So in the first week, I would start by developing 40-minute content. I would break all my chunks, just like everyone else. I had to break my content down in chunks of smaller increments. And I'd create a deck and a training deck, and hopefully an interactive PowerPoint deck with 40 minutes of content. I'd then train my coaches by the end of the week, we'd have agreed to it and I'd have trained my coaches. So we're in alignment because my coaches hadn't done Kanban either. They were all really experienced Scrum coaches. But when I hired them, I told them, we'll all be moving to Kanban. Join me if you want to come on the journey. Otherwise, this isn't the job for you. So they were learning this for the first time themselves. So they're coaching without having doing yet. Then I trained my peers. So there's nothing worse than having stuff going out to the teams and then having resistance from your colleagues at your peer level. So I would literally train them. And then I'd say to my peers, can I have your support on this week? This is what they're going to be doing in the next fortnight. And could you help me and reinforce it? And then any objections that I had, we couldn't deal with, I wouldn't go ahead with that content, but I didn't have that. But it gave me time to make sure that my peers had to go first. So they were also managing through the week, trying to reinforce whatever we were all trying to do. Yeah. Then very shortly thereafter, like within days, the next round would run to product owners and scrum masters separately, so we could help them and deal with their objections and train them so they felt like they could lead the team effectively and they had a little bit of confidence and they could ask questions first. And then we'd roll it out to the teams. So we had this rolling deck of training. So as 1 week, essentially leadership was being trained, the next week the team leadership, and then the teams themselves. So essentially the scrum masters and product owners had seen the content twice. They'd seen it when we personally trained them, and through repetition, they'd also seen it when they'd start to telling the team how they were going to start applying it with them during the week, right? That was their role within the few days before we presented it to the team to have a fair idea about how they were going to roll it out, because everyone had to apply it that week. Yeah. So it wasn't just knowledge for the sake of it. They were given an activity that they had to be doing in that week to roll out. So that was pretty key. You've got to have everybody on the same page, and people say that, but then they just train the teams. And that's counterproductive for that. So that would be the first one. The second one is stop using performance measurements for your teams or fictitious estimates, because story points can be fudged and they're complete BS. You're wasting your time. You've got 10% off the top if your teams aren't doing estimates. And instead, this is what Kanban advocates, if you want to accelerate delivery, standardize your performance metrics for everyone using the facts of time in days specifically. And the reason is for that is because even though they're doing different types of work, you're not trying to get all teams to do the same amount of days. You're trying to get them to improve their own performance as a team measurement. So even though they might be using the same platform, we had 3 teams that used the same platform and did technically the same type of work, but had different team members. Different team members with different skill levels. And so naturally they had different capability even on the same type of work. And the last thing I would say, Megan, is this would be it. If I had a piece de resistance, is stop everyone multitasking. Or we have a couple of interactive activities we would teach our teams, and I teach the coaches to teach the teams, to actually stop multitasking so that each person only does a few things at a time. And there was a couple of things we had to do that. It wasn't just the limiting WIP in progress. We also had to teach leaders how to stop pushing a lot of work onto their teams and to go, you can have everything you want, just one thing at a time. And you get to decide what goes first. So multitasking is the biggest one. Those 3 things, Megan, would be my bigger takers, literally.
Hi, Becky, it's Greg here. Can you just clarify what it was you were measuring if you're not measuring points?
Days.
So the velocity based on the time to complete a card?
Yeah. So the time that they pick up a card and they start working on it to the time it gets put into done, that's essentially a lapsed time or days that are passed in between that time. And so we would call that the time. Most people call that a lead time or system lead time. Some people call it cycle time for that particular area.
Excellent. We've got some of the questions here in chat. If you don't mind, Becky, I'll ask some of these questions. So the first one is from Dick. He says, do you have a way to benchmark the efficiency across teams?
No. Oh, I do, but I didn't. I didn't at this case. And the reason is I had 11 teams and I was more interested in them learning and creating a culture of learning than I was than trying to make them all the same. Because every team can only learn at their own pace. And this is where you get to a point where I push enough information and enough targets, and then I let them pull the rate of change that they can handle for whatever reason. whether it be technically or personally or whatever. So the benchmark is for me those KPIs each quarter thereafter. They had KPI quarters about how much they had to improve. And so I would say 5%, 10% each quarter, how it would go moving forward. So the benchmark was relative, but the 10% for one team is not 10% relative to another team because everyone's different. And so I'm more interested in them learning to improve than setting a benchmark arbitrarily, because I would set different benchmarks per team if there was a reason for it. So continuous improvement targets, yes. Benchmarking, no, because your teams are not the same.
Can I ask something? So even if you would reach a level of maturity in that case, when will you know that the team, you have a high-performing team and other teams are okay?
As soon as I get someone producing 40% improvement, what I did is I showcased them to the world. So I got them training the program leaders, I got them training the other Scrum Masters, the other product owners, and then demonstrating to all the other teams. And what happened is then everyone went, oh my God, we want to be just like that team. And so then they all pulled everyone else through on the program. So to me, I don't think there's a benchmark for high performing. I'm interested, high performing for me is if I can create a system of learning that goes even when I leave. Because high performing is only relative to the last high unperforming. So for me, high performing is what you make it. And I find the sky's the limit. There's some amazing things. I've watched ordinary people do extraordinary things when they work really as a team. So does that answer it, Dirk?
I think part of Dirk's question is that you can get high-performing teams, but they can go stale over time, right? So they can get lazy or they can get too comfortable and stop innovating, stop learning. So do you use techniques to deliberately mix up your teams and stimulate that openness to change and taking on new techniques?
We didn't. We had consistency in our teams, but we did make them share amongst each other. So we let them set up their ceremonies for how they were going to collaborate and share amongst each other for that. And remember, they all still had consistent targets for month on month after that. So that's what kept the consistency of behaviour. And then I'd ask them, how are you going? And they go, oh, we slipped a bit this month, but we got it back because we realised we need to correct and stuff like that.
So they're obviously part of that goal setting, and you're talking about quarterly KPIs.
Yeah, we held them to that. So just as you would have quarterly KPIs around what they had to achieve for the month, we had 50% of our KPIs based on what, as in the work they were doing, the program, and 50% based on how. So that consistent ratio held, 50% what, 50% how. Anna, you have a question about measuring the cost and align with the wider company reporting. This is what I took to management, and this is what I present to you today as a leader about cost and align when I presented this business case. And I said, if I could get my teams to improve by 17%, what's that worth to us as leadership? So I had my senior program leadership with me saying, I want you to go faster, Becky, go faster, make everyone go faster. And then I would say to them, okay, well, let's talk about what that really means, because we have to all commit to that going faster together. Yeah. So if you've got 10 people on a team and then they've got, let's just say for an average of 100 grand in salary each, including all the overheads and stuff that you've got, and you get 17%, say it takes you 6 months to get that 17% increase. Now remember, my first team got 40% in the first 30 months. So their graph would have looked like way up here at 40% before that. Essentially, that means you're buying or creating capacity then of 170,000 per month ongoing, if you can hold that element. That's what I'm saying, yeah. So that's the equivalent of 1.7 persons per month. So I would report these figures about what that equation meant back to our efficiency for our team, reporting about how much faster we're going. So when Steerco asked how we're going, this is what we're doing this month, and this is how much capacity we've created without adding extra headcount. That was $1 million in savings then, if you did that for the last 6 months for the financial year. So if you did this in the first 6 months, it took you 6 months to get to the 17%, which it doesn't ever take that for me, but you would have then in the second half of the financial year $1 million worth of savings, and that's a return on investment for 8.5%. And that was a clear justification for us about why we would justify having our agile coaches or the delivery coaches. that was the measurable benefit that they were bringing back to align to cost. So for us, we didn't increase staff, Anna, we just provided details about what that actually meant to the bottom line. And I think that's the hardest thing, is that if we don't measure it, we don't get to really blow our own horn. You know, it's so hard as a leader saying, we are going fast. We are, I'm sure we are. But until someone actually sees it physically and sees the numbers, then, you know, it's harder to justify that ROI and go, basically, this is what I bought your teams. And if you do that for one team, now times that by 10 teams.
Do you work on the backlog as well? Because one of the challenges I've had in the past is people being challenged on the value of what they're delivering, not just the velocity.
Yeah, definitely. And that's why in conjunction, we also had training modules around for the product owners. That was a separate stream that was teaching them about how they engaged with the customers, how they prioritized work, and how they had an extra canvas for them that was different about at the program level. And Greg, that was literally an experiment canvas based on Lean Starter. And so they had to prove to me that they could add value in 1 month or under. Never were they allowed to start any piece of work, whether you called it an epic or initiative or whatever the sizing meant, it was irrelevant. I don't care. I don't care because my customer doesn't care how many tasks or subtasks you do. I don't care where it is. The bottom line is there has to be a customer outcome in under a month. And then we worked to slowly decrease that time till they got really good at experimenting in under 3 weeks and then under 2 weeks and kept crawling it down for the elements. So the value that we're delivering was separate to necessarily a way of working because the teams didn't get to control the value that they put in, but I did. So I got to work with my product owners separately as part of their coaching. They had to do double learning because they had to learn about how they controlled value and how they measured value. And we were doing that in consecutive. Craig, to answer that one. Important, but I think this is the trap that we get into, that we only measure the value of what, but we don't measure the value of how.
Becky, there is a question in chat from Darren. He said, what techniques we use to constrain work item size / complexity so they were finishable within a reasonable time?
So we had a rule. My rule is that the right sizing is a principle of Kanban, that you right size your work. So what does that mean? Right sizing means that for a team, whatever you're doing, try it for a team, not for an individual, for a team. So in Kanban, we shift from having a task board, right, full of tasks, into a board that we're doing increments of value for the customer. So for a team, if they couldn't finish any piece of work in under 2 to 3 days, we had a problem. We need to slice it down. So we introduced tools, which is why I started producing a tool for Jira, because so many teams were using Jira, that allows us to do this, where we measured how many people were on a card, because I don't want individuals working on an increment of value for the customer. I want a team working on a card, and I want to see that level of engagement for the team all touching the card and sorting it out and working it together and collaborating. So that was the rule. Right sizing was one of the principles before an item entered into what you would formerly have called with Scrum the sprint backlog. We right-sized it to 2 or 3 days. So for the people that are doing stuff non-IT, let me give you an example of what that is. For marketing and marketing campaigns, breaking it down to items of components that a team could do in 2 to 3 days if you really got organised. For things like finance, that's about breaking down the debtors recovery schedule that you've got. Instead of doing it in the batch of 7,000 at once, breaking it down to the first 1,000. For ops teams, we would break it down by chunking it into geographic regions or state, or the highest problem customers or something, or alphabetical. We'll take the A to L's first and then the K to Z's later. That's just simply splitting the work into chunks. We're doing the same amount, we're just breaking into chunks of 2 or 3 days. And Megan, yes, context switching is the enemy of everyone. But saying that, we had to take everyone through some massive exercises, some interactive fun exercises to help them see the cost of context switching. Until you experience it yourself, then that's when you guess the point of context switching.
I've got a quick question for you, Becky.
Yeah.
By creating capacity within your teams and actually accelerating the way the work's going through the teams, I'm guessing that they went from probably being the constraint in creating organisational delivery to not the constraint.
You always have a constraint.
Yep. So I'm just wondering, what was the constraint that was next shown up? Because that can be a very interesting thing when what was considered to be the slowest part of the organisation is no longer the slowest?
Yeah, so we had 13 teams. So from my perspective, I'm always balancing the constraint across all the teams. When I first started, we didn't have what you would call in Scrums cross-functional teams. So they would call themselves that. They could have been more cross-functional, right, in that sense. So from a program perspective, there were some pieces of work that I had to get through 4 teams to get it shipped.
Yep.
So they were producing back-end APIs in one team, consuming them in the middle-end API teams, and then exposing those front-end APIs as well to, say, a web portal for those elements. And then of those 3 or 4 teams, we also had to then, communicate obviously with partner programs and marketing and training and all those things as well. So the answers for me for those critical pieces of work, we had ceremonies where we would bubble up the blockers amongst all the teams, and we would prioritize which ones we knocked over first based on who had the critical path for the highest value elements. So that would be something I did on a program board of working on that. So the answer was teams always have them individually, but then sometimes you prepare to let that blocker or that bottleneck on a team lie so that you can optimize the whole more so. So sometimes I'd say, okay, this teams, you're touching this platform, this is our bottleneck. What are we doing for you? Let's have a quick 20-minute meeting. What can we do to relieve you this week? What are we doing? And let them take it, but us support them in following that bottleneck so we could shift it somewhere else.
So I was just wondering, because I've got a funny story of my own in this regard, where I was doing a similar role to yours, and the people who were designing the new products continually told, the person like yourself, you're too slow, you slow us down, we can't get to market. After having gone through an exercise very similar to yours, all it exposed was how long it actually took them to decide what the product was going to be and how much it was going to cost and what its features were going to be. And it shifted the whole organisational focus away from teams like yours back to, if these guys can get this out the door in a month to use yours, why does it take you 3 months to decide what you want them to do?
Yes, yeah. And that's what I said
sort of
back at the beginning. That's 60% of knowing what you want and getting those people who are deciding the what to write experiments so they get only a month's worth of work in the funnel, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just one of the, in my experience, it's one of the funny things that occurs. Yeah. Suddenly the spotlight goes somewhere else.
Woohoo!
Yeah, absolutely.
Benny, in answer to your question, does it apply to agency work? Definitely yes. With agency work, it's so great because you've got very clear customer orders. But with project work and agency work, conversely, what's absolutely critical is how you define the scope with the customer. So if you get handed a program where someone's given you really large program milestones that don't fit with an iterative and incremental way of delivery, then that's the challenge, yeah? I just wanted to share with you before I answer the last few questions about discovering how it will work for you. So I remember when I was first doing this and I didn't know if it would work for me. Let's be honest. I was traveling to the US and I was trying to find the best people to teach me this and to figure out how I could work better than Scrum, because there was quite a few deficiencies in Scrum. And when someone said to me, oh, you could increase your staff productivity by even 17%, I would have said, yeah, nah, that's just a marketing ploy. That's just crap. But what I've learned is that it's all about experiential learning, and that I wouldn't expect any leader to go, hey, you know what? We're going to run this to our whole program because I saw this great chick and she talked to me at a round table. Okay. So what we went and have had developed is an online simulation. So I used to do it all physical, but now we've got an online simulation where what you can do is get yourself and 4 other of your managers that are part of your key leadership and do an online simulation, or you can join a simulation with, say, the 5 people in the room now, for example. It doesn't have to be exclusive with your team. We set you up in a virtual team in a simulation environment, and we do a fast forward of the simulation and show you at the end of that simulation how, even if you don't understand the work, if you're not a details manager, if you're not in the front line of memorizing all of their work, just the principle works. And here's the secret that I learned is that there's a law behind all of this, and it's called Little's Law, and it works like gravity. You don't have to like gravity. Your opinion of it is irrelevant because gravity works whether you like it or not. And the same happens with Little's Law. You can choose to use it or you can choose to work against it. Either way, it's not emotionally attached to you, and it keeps working regardless of whether you know it or whether you like it or whether you apply it or you don't. In this simulation, you get to the end of the simulation and you see for yourself how your actions contributed in a fast track to a simulation to see the end result of it for yourself. And when you've seen that simulation and felt it and experienced it for yourself, there's an aha moment that clicks. And then, just like my teams, it doesn't matter what I say, you will know, and because you've experienced, that you can apply this will work for you. It's just like when you were young and you were a little kid and you jumped off a step and you learnt that every time you jumped off the step, you hit the ground. It was just about how hard you hit. So what I'm trying to say is that this is a safe place to come and grab yourself and your leaders and come to the simulation and try it and see what the result is, and then get the aha moment and go, you know what? This is gravity, man. We just got to get the ball rolling down the hill and get out of the way. That's what I learned, is that I can tell you this till I'm blue in the face, but there's an opportunity for you to do exactly the same thing. I'm not special. Let's be honest. It's nothing special about me. I just learned how to apply this principle on steroids. And the more I apply it, the better I get at knowing how to hit the steroids for it. So there's an opportunity that Alan can send you a link. I've got a little video and stuff as well that Alan will send you at the conclusion of this to show you that you can grab, either join with us in a group that's a public group session, or we can do a group session with you and your 4 or 5 leaders to join the simulation. There's a maximum of 5 to work in the simulation, so we can work you through the learning. But after 2 hours, just 2 hours, you will have seen mathematical statistical proof that you can do this, just like gravity. So there's an opportunity for you. So let's have some other questions for that.
Becky, there's one from Anna saying, how long do you think it takes the teams to accept the new ways of working?
I don't look at it, Anna, like a big jump. So for me, every change in one behaviour is measured, and I measure everything. And so if I take a new way of working and I move them like up a hill and they get to the next step on the hill, I'm celebrating every step along the way. I could take that team even further if I'd stayed longer, but I know, to me, it's about the people. And I know that, interestingly enough, many of the people that I trained went on to new jobs and got a promotion of $50,000 once they left, like that, because the level of skill that they had about controlling the what and controlling the how, they can run teams anywhere with anything because they know how to pull the levers. So to me, it was about developing people, and some people can learn faster than others. So you would see results. For me, I see results starting within 6 weeks, as in like changes in people's behaviours, aha moments happening. And that's how you get the training to them as well, so that they can pick it up and apply it at a pace that's suitable for them. So once they have enough knowledge, so I do a see one, a do one, and a teach one. So my expectations, if you've done one, you're teaching the next person. You can't go wrong. It's gravity. It works whether you go downhill, whether you like it or not. So just try it with someone else.
Excellent. We had a comment from Mark, who's had to leave. He'd be interested to see how much of the improvement is due to the system versus the Hawthorne effect and your drive and enthusiasm. What are your thoughts on that, Becky?
Look, I think definitely I count for something. But you know what? I think the bit that counts is something different to what you would expect. Like, I think the bit that counts is the fact that when I get beside my team and leaders like yourselves, and I'd love more nothing than to work with you guys and buddy beside you, I understand that the change that you will affect as a leader for your teams is directly proportional to your desire to change as a leader. Because when you get these aha moments and you go, oh, crap, I've been doing that for years. Like, you're like, oh my goodness, I've been doing that and I've been doing that and I've been doing that. And then you see the cause and effect of your own behaviours on your teams because it's measured. Then it's a journey on all of that. And so I grow all the time still. So I think it is partly me because I empower people. And I know you want to empower people too. We talk about empowered teams. That's what we got told that the sale of the sausage of the sizzle was with Scrum. We're all going to be empowered, self-organising teams. But the reality is that for the many people doing Scrum, those teams are not self-empowered. Whether it was Scrum or teams in, HR or in admin and finance, majority of people are disempowered. And when I gave them the power and authority and I said, once I approve your experiment canvas, it's your responsibility to make that team work and to make everyone deliver that value for the customer. Go for it. I expect you to do it. And I expect you to only come to me when you're stuck. And so this is the management by exception rule. So in Michael Porter talks about, remember way back in theory of like your internet education back in uni, Michael Porter wrote about management by exception. And he said, let them run and then manage them when they get stuck. And that's essentially the system that I set up for that. So I'd say some of it is me or you, of course, as the leader, definitely. But at the same time, if the leader sets up a system that empowers people, watch amazing things happen. I watched people that were genuinely quiet and reserved just come to life because I valued their opinion. And I said, no, that's your run. You go for it and I'll support you and I'll back you. And that means as a leader, I had to be also prepared when it didn't go the way we wanted. Yeah, so when we make mistakes, and we made some, they were beautiful. Like doses, right? You've got to be prepared as a leader to go, right, team, well, I supported that canvas. I approved it. And I said you could go ahead and do it. So that's okay. We all learn together. So I always knew what they were doing, and I always knew their experiments they were running, so they didn't run off in the wrong direction. And I always knew what their what experiments were as far as the value. So if we ever didn't achieve that customer outcome, I could also, the buck stops with me. So it doesn't mean I also let them go and do whatever they want. There was boundaries about that. So I think as a leader, if you can hold those boundaries in respect, but expect awesomeness from them and give them the system to have awesomeness, I think it all comes together with everything.
Excellent. I think we've got no more questions back in the chat. Does anybody want to ask one final question before we wrap up? We've gone a little bit over time.
No, all good. I'm happy to chat anyway separately. Alan will pass out my details as well.
Will do.
With all of that. I hope this inspired you all to understand what you can do today. It's there. It's there right now. It's that simple. And I'd love to work with you. If you want to reach out, that'd be awesome. We look forward to touching base, and we might find I've got another case to present of a similar but a different scenario. We can do that in a couple of months' time.
Fantastic.
Have an awesome rest of your day.
Thank you, Becky.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody.
Thanks.
Thanks Becky for everything as usual. Thanks everybody for participating. Have a wonderful afternoon, and we'll be in touch.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Take care.